What if the one thing you swore you'd never need showed up on your doorstep, uninvited, unannounced, and impossible to ignore? What if the walls you'd spent years building around yourself turned out to be nothing more than dry wood? And one wrong spark, one stranger, one moment was all it took to burn them down? This is a story about a man who had everything figured out. The land, the cattle, the silence. He had drawn his lines in the dirt, and nothing had ever dared to cross them. Until she showed up at his table. Stay with me, because by the time this story is over, you are going to ask yourself whether the life you've been protecting so carefully is actually a life at all. Cole Hargrove had been ranching the same 4,000 acres in eastern Montana since he was old enough to hold a fence post steady. He was 43 years old, 6 feet and 2 inches of lean muscle and weathered patience, and he had exactly zero interest in changing anything about his life. The ranch ran clean, the cattle were healthy, the books balanced. His foreman, a quiet Navajo man named Rudy, handled the crew with the same minimal words philosophy Cole lived by. They communicated mostly in nods and half sentences, which suited both of them perfectly. Cole woke at 4:45 every morning. He made black coffee. 2 cups, no sugar, no cream. He ate eggs, scrambled with whatever was left in the fridge. He checked the east pasture before 6, the water troughs by 7, and he made every decision about every acre of land before most people had finished their first scroll through a phone screen. He did not date. He did not socialize in town beyond the grocery run on Thursdays. He attended church twice a year, Christmas and Easter. Not out of deep conviction, but because his late mother had, and he hadn't found a reason to break the habit. He did not own a television. He owned a radio that only picked up 2 stations clearly, and he preferred the one that played old country because the other one talked too much. His neighbors in Billings County had long since stopped trying to set him up. There had been attempts over the years. A school teacher from Miles City, a widow who ran the hardware store in Forsyth, a woman who had visited from Denver and declared Montana completely enchanting before leaving 3 days later and never returning. Cole had been polite to all of them. He had not called any of them back. People in town used the word cold to describe him, but that wasn't exactly right. Cold implies something that was once warm. Cole wasn't cold. He was just finished. He had decided, somewhere around his 36th birthday, that the energy required to build something with another person, the negotiating, the adjusting, the constant management of someone else's expectations, was energy better spent on the land. The land never asked him to explain himself. The land just needed work. And Cole understood work. He said it plainly to Rudy one evening in October, after Rudy's wife Dolores had invited Cole to dinner for the 3rd time that month. He had declined again, and Rudy had given him the look, the one that said, "Dolores is going to hear about this, and she is not going to be pleased." Cole had set down his coffee mug and said, "I don't need a wife, Rudy. I don't need a girlfriend, a companion, a dinner date, or a pen pal. What I need is for the north fence to stop sagging and for someone to figure out why the 3rd pump keeps losing pressure." Rudy had nodded. Then he'd said, without looking up from his paperwork, "The pump's a clog in the secondary line. North fence is Tuesday, and Dolores says you're going to die alone eating cold eggs." Cole had smiled at that, just barely. "That's fine," he'd said. "I like cold eggs." And that, right there, was the complete picture of Cole Hargrove's life. Orderly, resolved, finished. Until the 3rd week of November, when a green pickup truck with a cracked rear window and Colorado plates turned down his driveway and didn't stop. Cole was coming out of the barn when he saw it. The truck came slow, which meant whoever it was either didn't know where they were going or was being deliberately cautious. Strangers who turned down private ranch roads and drove slow were either lost or selling something, Neither one interested Cole. He stood at the barn door and watched. The truck pulled to a stop near the main house. A man got out first, mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a canvas jacket that had seen better decades. He moved stiffly, like someone whose knees had long ago stopped cooperating. He looked around the yard once, then straightened up and squared his shoulders, in the way people do when they're trying to project confidence they don't quite feel. Cole didn't move. He waited. Then the passenger door opened. She was maybe 22, 23. She got out carrying a backpack over one shoulder and a cardboard box under her other arm. Brown hair pulled back with a rubber band. Not styled, just practical. Work boots that had actual mud on them, not the decorative kind you buy at a boutique in Bozeman. She looked around the yard the same way her father had, but without the posturing. She just looked, quiet eyes taking in the barn, the equipment, the sky. Cole walked over. The man stuck out his hand. Tom Keeler. I run the Keeler supply outfit up in Glendive. Probably know the name. We've done some business. Cole shook it. Cole Hargrove. What can I do for you? Tom Keeler shifted his weight. Then he said something Cole had not expected. I need a favor, and I know I don't have any right to ask one. Here's the thing about a man who lives in deliberate silence. He hears things most people miss. And what Cole heard in Tom Keeler's voice, underneath the careful formality of it, was the sound of a man who was genuinely scared and genuinely tired and had run out of better options. Cole looked at the woman. She was looking at the cattle in the east pasture, not at him. Go ahead, Cole said. Tom Keeler's story came out in pieces over the next 20 minutes, standing in Cole's yard with the November wind coming down off the ridge. The short version was this. Tom had a heart condition that had moved from manageable to urgent. He needed surgery, a serious one, and rehabilitation, and he was looking at somewhere between 2 and 3 months of recovery. His wife had passed 6 years earlier. His son was in the Navy and stationed overseas. His daughter, the woman with the backpack and the mud boots, whose name was Nora, had driven him up from Colorado and had nowhere to go during his recovery. That made any sense. Nora had been working ranch operations in Wyoming for the past 3 years. She knew cattle, fencing, irrigation, the whole picture. She had heard Tom once mention Cole Hargrove's name over some supply deal years back. I'm not asking for charity, Tom said carefully. Nora works. She works hard. She's worth 2 hired hands and she knows it. I'm asking if you've got room for her to bunk and work through February. By then, I'll be back on my feet, and she can come home. Cole had never had a woman working the ranch before, not because of any policy. It simply had never come up. He looked at Nora again. She had turned from the cattle and was looking at him now, directly, with the kind of straightforward patience that said she had heard this pitch and didn't love that her father was making it and would understand completely if the answer was no. That look, more than anything Tom Keeler had said, made Cole pause. He said, "You've worked cattle operations before?" She said, 3 years, 2 in Wyoming, 1 in New Mexico. I can rope, vaccinate, run wire, read pasture condition, manage a feeding program, and fix most things mechanical if you give me an hour with the problem. Cole looked at her boots again, then at her hands. Calloused palms, short nails. Not manicured, not soft. He looked at Tom Keeler, who was trying hard not to look desperate. Cole said, "She stays in the bunkhouse. Same rules as any other hand. Rudy runs the crew. What I say about the operation goes. No debate." Tom Keeler let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for approximately 4 days. Nora said simply, "Understood." And that was how Nora Keeler came to sit at Cole Hargrove's table. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who seemed so closed off, so deliberately finished, That you assumed their story was already written? Drop a comment below. I want to know. And if you're not subscribed yet, now would be a real good time. Hit that button. We've got a long winter ahead, and this story is just getting started. The first week was professional and nothing else. Nora showed up at work before Cole did, which surprised him. He had arrived at the barn at 4:55 on her first morning, expecting to have to explain the routine, and found her already there, gloves on, looking at the feeding schedule he'd posted on the wall, running her finger down the list of pasture rotations. She turned when she heard him. "You've got a pasture rotation gap in December," she said. "Between the northeast section and the ridge lot. Cattle are going to overgraze the lower plain if you don't adjust." Cole looked at the schedule. She was right. He said, "Fix it." She fixed it. It went like that through the first 10 days. She found things. Not problems exactly, more like inefficiencies. Small places where the operation had grown comfortable with something being slightly off. The third pump clog that had been going on for weeks. She diagnosed it in 45 minutes and had the fix by noon. The sagging north fence that Rudy had been meaning to address. She and one of the younger hands had it tensioned and reposted by the end of day 2. Rudy watched all of this with an expression that Cole recognized as restrained approval. Rudy did not give easy approval. The fact that he watched Nora work with anything other than skepticism was, in Rudy's language, practically a standing ovation. Cole kept his distance. He was professional, direct, not unfriendly, just bounded. He told himself it was because she was an employee, which was true. He told himself that maintaining a clear professional line was smart management, which was also true. What he didn't tell himself, because he wasn't ready to, was that Nora Keeler was the first person to sit at his kitchen table in approximately 6 years who didn't make the silence feel like something that needed to be filled. She ate quickly. She didn't make small talk. She asked about the operation when there was something specific to ask about. And when there wasn't, she ate her food and looked out the window at the pasture like someone who actually found it interesting. That was unusual. Most people looked out Cole's kitchen window and saw nothing. Nora looked out the window and appeared to be actively reading the land, checking wind, watching the cattle shift, processing. On a Wednesday in the second week, Cole sat down across from her at breakfast and said, without preamble, "Where'd you learn to read pasture condition like that?" She looked up from her eggs. "My father, when I was young. Then a foreman in New Mexico named Grady Huerta. He ran 1,500 head and never lost a single animal to poor pasture management in 20 years. I paid attention. Most people don't. Most people think the land will tell you what it needs by the time the damage is done. Grady said the land tells you before, if you're listening. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father seems like a decent man." Nora's face didn't change much, but something in it shifted. A small tightening around the eyes. There and gone. "He is," she said. "He's stubborn and he's bad at asking for help, and he waited about 2 years longer than he should have to address this heart situation. But yes, he's decent." Cole nodded. He refilled his coffee. He went back to his work, but he thought about that conversation all day. Now, I want to be clear about something, because stories like this have a tendency to move at a pace that compresses what actually happens in real life. So let me be honest with you about how this unfolded. Nothing rushed here. Nothing dramatic swept through and changed everything overnight. What happened was slower and quieter, and, in some ways, more unnerving than anything dramatic could have been. It was a Tuesday in early December when the first real break in the pattern happened. The weather had turned hard. A dry cold that dropped temperatures 30 degrees in 6 hours and brought a wind off the ridge that had no business being that cruel in early December. Cole was out checking on the cattle in the south pasture when he heard the snap. It was the unmistakable sound of a fence post giving way. The kind of sound that means you're not going to be done before dark, no matter what else you had planned. He went to the truck for the gear. When he got to the brake, Nora was already there. She had heard it from further east in the pasture where she'd been working. She had the post puller out and was already working the broken post free, moving fast and clean, not wasting motion. The wind was vicious. Cole got to work without speaking. They ran wire and set posts in that wind for 3 hours and 20 minutes, passing tools back and forth with a wordless efficiency that comes either from years of practice or from some other kind of recognition. When the last post was driven and the wire was tensioned, Cole stood back and let out a breath that fogged in the cold. Nora coiled the extra wire with her back to the wind. Then she said, not looking at him, "You know you're a hard person to work for." Cole waited.
Near the ridge.
"Not cruel," she said. "Not unfair. Just airtight. Like every door's been shut and locked, and you've got the only key." Cole didn't say anything for a moment. The wind pulled at his jacket. Then he said, "That's been said before." "I believe it," Nora said. She finished coiling the wire and looked at him directly. "I'm not saying it as a criticism. I'm saying it because I recognize it. My father was the same way after my mother died. Spent 4 years being airtight." She paused. "And then he wasn't. I'm just not sure he knows what changed."
He wasn't.
She picked up the toolbox and walked back toward the truck. Cole stood there in that field for a moment in the cold, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. The particular discomfort of being understood by someone you hadn't given permission to understand you. He picked up the post driver and followed her to the truck. If you're watching this, and you've ever built walls around yourself and told yourself it was strength, I want to ask you something. When was the last time someone walked right through one of those walls, and you didn't even realize it was happening? Think about that. And honestly, if this story is landing for you, the best thing you can do right now is subscribe and leave a comment. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Now back to Cole. December moved into the second half. Cole's conversations with Nora grew longer, not by design but by function. They were working the same land, making the same decisions, and the natural pull of shared work began to stretch every exchange past the purely operational. He learned things. That she had studied agricultural science for 2 years at Colorado State, before deciding she wanted to be outside more than she wanted to be credentialed. That she could identify every visible constellation in the Montana sky, a skill picked up from her mother, who had been an amateur astronomer in the days before the term existed on social media. That she had been in a serious relationship in Wyoming that had ended not in drama, but in the quiet, grinding way things end, when two people realize they want completely different versions of the future. He wanted a house in Cheyenne and a job that ended at 5, she said. They were sitting on the porch after a long day, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm. Nothing wrong with that. Just wasn't what I wanted. What did you want? She looked out at the dark pasture. This, she said simply. Exactly this. Land that needs tending. Work that means something. Enough quiet to think. Cole said nothing, but something inside him, some wall he had not even consciously built, shifted. Just slightly, the way a frost-heaved post settles back into the ground when the temperature changes. Rudy noticed it first, because Rudy noticed everything first. He didn't say anything to Cole directly. He simply mentioned to Dolores one evening that the boss had been leaving work approximately 15 minutes later each day for the past 2 weeks, and that he seemed to be doing so for reasons that had nothing to do with the cattle. Dolores had smiled and said nothing, and started planning a Christmas dinner that seated 8 instead of 6. Christmas arrived cold and clear. Tom Keeler called Nora from the hospital. The surgery had gone well, The recovery was on track, and he was already arguing with the nursing staff about the food, which the doctor took as a positive sign. Nora listened to her father's voice with the phone pressed close to her ear, and when the call ended, she sat at the kitchen table for a moment, with her eyes not quite focused. Cole was washing dishes. He had not planned to say anything. He said, "Good news. Surgery went well." She set the phone down. "He's going to be fine. They think 6 more weeks of rehabilitation and he can go home." "That's good." "Yeah." She was quiet. Then, "He's going to want me to come back in February." Cole dried a pan and hung it back on the rack. He kept his voice level. "Is that what you want?" The question sat between them. Outside, the wind had gone still. The particular absolute silence that only comes in the deepest part of a Montana winter, when the cold itself seems to be holding its breath. Nora looked at him with those direct, quiet eyes. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. 6 weeks ago I was certain. Now I'm less certain." Cole nodded once. He put away the last dish. He said, "Don't rush the answer." And then he did something he had not done in years. He sat back down at the table, not to work, not to plan, just to sit. And they finished their coffee in a silence that, for the first time in a very long time, Cole did not want to be the only one in. January brought a blizzard that kept the whole operation in close quarters for 5 days. The kind of storm that tests people. Not their courage, just their patience. Their ability to share space without it becoming a pressure cooker. Rudy and the 2 younger hands had weathered the storm in the bunkhouse. Cole and Nora had spent it in the main house by necessity. The bunkhouse was full, and the weather was not negotiable. They had passed the 5 days in a rhythm that surprised both of them. They cooked. They ran numbers on the spring cattle plan. They argued, actually argued, about whether to expand the herd by 80 head in the spring or hold steady, about whether the east irrigation system needed a full overhaul or just targeted repairs. Real disagreements made in good faith, with neither of them backing down until the better argument won. Cole had not argued with anyone about the operation in years. He had employees who deferred, and neighbors who didn't understand it, and a bank officer in Billings who only spoke in generalities. Nora argued like someone who had skin in the game, like it mattered to get it right, not just to be right. On the 3rd night of the storm, with the wind pressing hard against the windows, Nora said something that Cole had not been expecting. "You know what the hardest thing about being around you is?" she said. Cole looked up from the cattle records. "You make sense," she said. "You're the first person I've been around in years who makes complete, consistent sense. You do what you say. You say what you mean. You don't perform any version of yourself for anyone. It's unsettling, actually." Cole set down the records. Unsettling. Because it makes me realize how much performance I've been doing without knowing it. She said it plainly, without self-pity. "That's all. Just an observation." Cole looked at her for a long moment. The wind pressed harder. "Just an observation. You're not performing right now," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "I'm not." Nothing more was said. The storm continued, but something had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just the way winter light changes between 4 in the afternoon and 4:30. You can't see it happening. You only notice when you look up and realize the room is different. February came. Tom Keeler was discharged. He called Nora on a Wednesday morning to tell her he was home, feeling strong, ready for her to come back and help him get the supply business back on its feet. Nora thanked him. She said she'd call back Thursday. She came to Cole that evening. He was in the barn, going through the equipment for spring. She stood in the barn door and said, "My father needs me back." Cole kept working. "I know. I need to figure out what I want to do." Cole set down the part he'd been looking at. He turned and looked at her, directly, with none of the careful distance he had maintained for months. "I know what I want," he said. "I've known for a while. I've been sitting on it because I didn't want to make your situation complicated." Nora was quiet. Cole said, "You're the best hand this operation has ever had. You're the only person I've sat at that table with in 6 years who didn't make the silence feel like a problem. And you argued me into a better cattle plan for spring, and you were right about the east irrigation, and I've been sleeping better since November than I have in years. And I don't think that's a coincidence." He paused. "I'm not asking you to choose between your father and this. I'm asking if there's a version of the future where this is still part of your picture." Nora looked at him for a long time. The barn was warm from the bodies of the cattle. Outside, a Montana winter wind moved through the yard. Then she said, "I've been thinking about the same version." Cole nodded once. He picked the part back up. "Then call your father," he said. "Tell him the truth. We'll figure out the rest." Nora smiled then. A real smile. Not performed, just present. "You're still the hardest person to read I've ever met," she said. Cole almost smiled. "You figured me out in December," he said. "You're just being polite." She laughed. It was a quiet sound, not theatrical. The kind of laugh that fits inside a barn at the end of a long day when the wind is finally calm. And somewhere in that laugh, in that barn, in the dying end of a Montana February, Cole Hargrove felt something he had long since written off as unnecessary. He felt like someone who hadn't finished after all. By March, Nora had spoken with Tom. Her father had taken the news better than she'd expected, partly because he'd heard something in her voice that told him the answer before she gave it, and partly because Cole Hargrove was a name Tom had respected for years, and he was not a man who stood between his daughter and something good. Tom came out to the ranch that spring. He walked the pastures slowly, still recovering, but his eyes were sharp. He watched Cole and Nora work together, the way they moved in the same orbit without colliding, the way decisions got made in half sentences, the way silence between them was never empty. Over dinner that first night, Tom sat across from Cole and said, "Took you both long enough?" Cole said, "Some things take the time they take." Tom nodded at that and ate his food, and looked out the kitchen window at the pasture that had been through one hard winter and was already greening at the edges. And he thought that some pieces of the world, when they finally fit together, fit so well, you almost can't remember what the gap felt like. Nora refilled his coffee without being asked. He thanked her. He looked at his daughter. He didn't say anything else because in that kitchen, on that ranch, nothing else needed to be said. "Now, before I let you go, I have to ask, because that's the deal we've made here. You watch, you think, I ask. What is it that you've been protecting yourself from that might actually be the thing you need most? Because Cole Hargrove spent 7 years calling his solitude a preference when it was really just a fear, wearing a very convincing set of work boots. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely read them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is built for people who like their stories the way Cole likes his coffee. Strong, no sugar, and honest. Hit that button. It means everything. Before this video ends, there's something you should know. This story, every acre of it, every cold morning and wind-pressed fence line, was created by artificial intelligence and developed independently as an original work of fiction. Cole, Nora, Tom Keeler, Rudy, the ranch, the storm, the barn, the Montana Ridge. All of it is the product of creative imagination. The figures, places, and events you just watched come to life are entirely fictional and exist only to tell a story worth telling. If anything in this story resonated with you, that's yours. That's real. But the characters themselves, they live only here, and only because someone decided to build them out of words and light.